They shot her point blank straight through the chest and left her bleeding inside an abandoned fortress while laughing over the radio. They snapped photos of her body, called it confirmation, then moved on to their next target. But the thing about shooting a Navy SEAL in the heart is you better make damn sure that heart actually stops. Because Major Morgan Kane wasn't finished yet. The convoy route wound through the forgotten stretches of the Khyber Pass. Ancient stone watched from imposing heights as armored vehicles crawled like insects through the narrow pass of the Afghanistan-Pakistan border. Officially, it was a standard NATO patrol. Unofficially, Major Kane had walked through minefields that felt safer than this operation. She leaned against the matte green MRAP eyes scanning the ridgeline. Her team was tight: 6 SEALs, 3 Delta operators, and a handful of local contractors whose mismatched gear and 2 clean boots didn't inspire confidence. Master Chief Sullivan appeared beside her, weathered face carved from decades of harsh sun and harsher combat. He nodded toward the lead vehicle where one of the contractors fiddled with a drone case. "Still not convinced about these guys?" he asked. Kane's lips barely moved. "Their gear is too clean," one of them called a magazine a clip. Sullivan almost smiled, a microscopic change in expression that only someone who'd served with him for years would notice. "You always this paranoid? When 9 Americans get ambushed on a supposedly friendly road, paranoia is just pattern recognition." The dry mountain grass shifted against ancient stone. No wind, no birds, no locals. She tapped the digital map on her wrist. "This stretch is supposed to be IED country. Intel says last week's convoy hit 2 bombs here." "Maybe someone cleared it," Sullivan offered. "Yeah, but who?" One of the contractors approached. Tall, sharp haircut, East Coast accent, sleeves rolled high to reveal forearm ink. A wolf's head marked with unfamiliar script. It didn't sit right with her. "Ma'am, drones are airborne. Full satellite uplink," he said. Kane studied him. "Name? Hayes, Daniel Hayes. You've run this route before. Twice, smooth both times." "Funny, that's not what Intel said." Hayes shrugged. Then maybe Intel was wrong. She didn't answer, just let the silence stretch until Sullivan cut in. "Ma'am, we movin'." Kane scanned the landscape one last time. Ridges, old fortresses, bends in the dirt road that felt staged. "Yeah, mount up." The team moved with practiced precision, every motion sharp and automatic. Engines roared to life, dust swirling from the gun truck's tires as if trying to hide something. Kane climbed into the lead MRAP, settling behind the gunner's platform, her fingers tapping the dash. Not from nerves, but calibration. Sullivan leaned in. "You thinking it's a trap?" "I'm thinking nobody needs to fake a war out here. There's enough real ones buried under this dirt. And if it goes loud, we don't wait for permission." The convoy rolled forward. The line of vehicles stretched thin, too open, too vulnerable. Behind them, Hayes' drone hummed overhead. Ahead, the stillness held its breath. And somewhere deep in Morgan Kane's chest, instincts tapped out Morse code in her pulse. Not fear, just the rhythm of someone who'd survived too much to ignore the silence before it breaks. The first 20 minutes crawled by in a silence so dense it made your teeth ache. Engines droned, radios crackled. The convoy crept forward. Kane sat with her rifle resting across her lap, eyes never still. "Convoy 1 status green," Sullivan called. His thumb tapped the receiver twice. His tell. "Copy status green." They rounded a tight corner where rock pressed hard against the road. The world erupted. The lead MRAP ahead vanished in a bloom of fire and twisted steel. The explosion hurled armor plates skyward like shrapnel confetti. The shockwave slammed into her vehicle hard enough to crack her spine against the seat. The windshield splintered into a spiderweb. "I need contact front!" Sullivan's voice roared. Gunfire followed in clean, controlled bursts from the ridgeline. Not the wild spray and pray of insurgents, but precise, coordinated volleys that sealed off every escape route. As if the ambush had been rehearsed for weeks. "Ambush left ridge!" Chief Sullivan shouted, yanking the gunner into position as the 50 cal roared to life. Muzzle flashes strobed off the rocks while empty shells rained like metallic hail through the fractured windshield. Major Kane caught sight of the contractors, 3 of them backing away from the fight. One dropped his rifle entirely. Another barked into a handset she didn't recognize. "Sullivan, eyes on those contractors." "They're pulling back," she yelled. "Copy," he snapped, swinging fire across the ridge as grenades thumped and machine guns chewed the ground. Dirt spitting around the tires like the earth itself was trying to spit them out. Kane kicked open the door and dropped behind the MRAP's wheel well, lungs burning from dust and cordite. A few yards ahead, Sergeant Walker lay bleeding, a red bloom spreading fast across his thigh. "Stay with me," she called, dragging him in with strength. Her frame had no right to have pressing gauze hard against the wound as blood soaked through her gloves. Then came a sound that sliced through the chaos, a single sharp crack, clean and deliberate. The impact hit like a hammer to the chest, knocking the air out of her lungs as the round smashed into her armor and drove deep. The world tilted, edges blurring for a heartbeat. She saw only the fractured blue sky through black smoke. Sullivan's voice exploded over comms, ragged and urgent. "Commander down! Commander down!" The SEALs tightened their lines, pulling the wounded into cover. But the enemy fire grew harsher, more disciplined, inching closer. Kane tried to breathe, but her chest burned like white fire. Blood filled her mouth as her fingers clawed instinctively at her vest, feeling the shattered ceramic plate and the burning hole near where her heart should be. Vision closing, sound fading. The last thing she caught, before darkness crept in, was Sullivan's voice holding steady through the storm, and laughter. The men on the ridge were laughing, certain the woman who'd held the line was finally gone. Muffled explosions pulsed like distant drums, while her heart beat louder than the heavy gun above. Before she passed into blackness, a single thought crystallized through the pain. These weren't Taliban fighters. The tactics were too clean, too Western. She'd been set up. Colonel James Westbrook stood at the edge of Coronado's killing beach. Salt spray clung to his weathered face as the Pacific hammered the shore. Behind him, 20 SEAL candidates lay face down in the frigid surf arms, linked in a human chain against the pounding waves. Hell Week Day 3. He'd run this training for 30 years, breaking the best warriors America could produce, then rebuilding them into something beyond ordinary human limitation. At 68, his body carried the scars and memories of 3 wars and countless classified operations that would never make the history books. The cadets called him Iron Jim, the old man who could still outrun, outswim, and outfight men a third his age, the living legend who'd served in every American conflict since the Cold War. He watched as the instructors shouted at the gasping candidates, "You think you're drowning now? This is nothing. Your body's lying to you. Your mind quits before your body does." Among the struggling bodies, one figure caught his attention. Smaller than the rest, fighting the Pacific with methodical determination. Candidate Kane. The only woman in this class and the daughter of a ghost from Westbrook's past. "Sir Kane's struggling," an instructor observed. Westbrook didn't respond immediately. His eyes narrowed against the salt spray, watching how Morgan Kane maintained position despite waves that kept forcing her under. "No," he finally said. "She's calculating. She's not fighting the ocean. She's working with it." The instructor looked unconvinced. "She shouldn't be here, sir. We both know why she made it this far." Westbrook's voice hardened. Candidate Kane earned her place like everyone else. "All due respect, Colonel. Her father was your teammate. People talk." The old colonel turned slowly to face the younger man. The weight of decades of combat hung in his gaze. "Commander William Kane saved 12 men in Basra before taking a bullet meant for me. Yes, he was my brother in arms. Yes, I promised him I'd look after his daughter if anything happened to him. But I've broken stronger candidates than her without blinking. She gets no special treatment." The instructor nodded, properly chastised. When the evolution ended, the candidates staggered to their feet. Several collapsed immediately. 2 required medical attention. Kane stood straight, shivering violently but steady on her feet. Westbrook approached her, his massive frame blocking the wind. "Your father would be proud," he said quietly. Kane's eyes, bloodshot from salt and exhaustion, met his. "Is that why I'm here, sir? Because of my father?" The colonel smiled, a rare sight that transformed his granite face. "Your father got you through the door, Kane, but only you can keep yourself from washing out. 8 more candidates quit today. Why not you?" She didn't hesitate. "Because I'm not done yet, sir." Westbrook nodded, satisfied. "Remember that feeling. Your body will break down before your will does. That's the secret most people never learn." He turned to leave, then paused. "Your father never told you why they called me Iron Jim, did he?" "No, sir. Took 3 rounds to the chest in Fallujah. Medics pronounced me dead. Body bag and all." He tapped his sternum. "But this old heart refused to stop. Remember that too, Kane. It's not over until you decide it's over." 3 years later, Westbrook stood on the parade ground as Morgan Kane received her trident, the ceremonial pin that marked her as one of the elite few, a Navy SEAL, the first woman to complete the training without compromise or concession. As he pinned the emblem over her heart, he whispered, "The body breaks first, the heart last. Never forget." Those words echoed now in the darkness of her mind as consciousness slowly returned to Major Morgan Kane. The memories of training faded, replaced by searing pain and the metallic taste of blood. She wheezed, blood bubbling at her lips, hands trembling, but mind steady. The body breaks before the will does. Iron Jim's voice came back calm and clear from years ago during drown-proofing drills. Don't listen to the body. She blinked through the blur. Her vest had stopped the round, but it cracked the plate and shattered ribs puncturing a lung. Yet her heart was still beating, and that meant she wasn't done. She forced her arm to move. Pain tore through her side, but her hand obeyed, clawing into the dirt for anchor. She turned her head, catching a glimpse of the fight through the haze. Her team falling back. Sullivan hauling a wounded man into cover. Gunfire flashing from the ridges. Enemy silhouettes darting between rocks. Then she heard it, closer, calmer than the rest. Confirm her. Chest shot. Nobody survives that. Boots scraped against gravel. A shadow loomed. Kane slowed her breathing, chest rising just enough to stir the dust blood streaking down her chin. She let her head fall limp against the ground, playing dead, because moving meant dying for real. Through half-closed eyes, she saw one of them kneel beside her masked rifle, slung low, radio crackling on his shoulder. Primary target neutralized, he said flatly. Another voice echoed through the comms, distant but clear. Copy. Collect her gear. We'll stage the bodies after. The man tugged at her vest straps, rolling her slightly. Pain detonated through her ribs as her body screamed to fight to grab his throat to end him. But instinct, cold and disciplined, overruled. Not yet, not yet. The boots moved away. 2 sets, then 3 scraped gravel as they carried another body off. Voices fading with each step. She swallowed blood and grit, forcing everything down to focus on one thing only. Her pulse. Not the chaos around her. Not the pain. Not the warmth soaking through her fatigues. Just that steady drum beneath her ribs. Slower, heavier, still there. You're not dead until you decide to stop fighting. Iron Jim's voice said in her head, and her right hand found dirt palm pressing hard. She braced and inched herself into the shallow shadow of the MRAP's wheel well, that unnoticed patch of cover becoming her refuge. Every tiny movement caused more agony than most people feel in a lifetime. And then voices crept back sharper now. The enemy was closing, stepping over gravel with the careful patience of hunters. She was bleeding out fast. Trail runs east. Follow it. Sweep the kill zone. Confirm all. Her vision blurred. Blackness crept in at the edges. She clenched her teeth until her jaw ached, refusing to let the dark take her. If they reached her, they'd learn this heart wasn't done. Kane stilled her breath. Blood pooled under her vest as she narrowed her eyes in that thin strip of shade. She wasn't going to run. Not yet. If they hauled her body away, they'd find out just how very alive she still was. They dragged her like luggage, one man on each arm. Boots scraped. The vest caught on rocks and dirt as they hauled her toward the burned-out shell of a stone fortress overlooking the road. The building looked ancient walls, half standing, a roof long gone. Soot clung to cracked stone. She's lighter than I expected, one muttered, his accented English polished but rough. How the hell did this one lead a team? Special forces types are overrated, the other said with a mocking tone. They break like everyone else, especially the women. Kane kept her body limp and breathed shallow. She counted steps, memorized turns, felt weight shifts in their grips. Her head lolled to the side so she could see the dark smear of blood she was leaving in the dust. A deliberate trail, like her pulse. They dumped her into what used to be a living room. Broken floorboards, charred rafters, a dusty beam sagging low enough it might cave if anyone breathed too hard. Let her bleed out, one said. We'll stage the photos when she's gone. A camera clicked. Plastic, commercial grade. She opened one eye just a crack and caught the lens aimed square at her chest. The cracked vest, the blood-stained collar, the trident badge barely visible under torn webbing. They'll believe she got it instantly, the first voice said. Chest wound. Everyone accepts that. Nobody survives a round through the heart. Except she doesn't look dead, a new voice said from the doorway. Heavier footsteps approaching. Let me check. Hayes, she knew that voice. Too smooth, too confident. You already got the pictures, the first one replied. What more do you need? Intel said she might have seen something before the ambush. The words landed like lead. Kane's heart slammed, not with fear, but with confirmation. They hadn't come simply to kill. They'd come to erase. Erase what she'd seen, erase what she knew. The convoy hadn't been a random ambush. This wasn't battlefield chaos. It was deliberate arms trafficking betrayal from the inside. That drone feed earlier hadn't just been mapping terrain. It had been syncing with something. Off-grid comms, private channels. Someone didn't want her reporting it. Was she carrying anything? Hayes asked. Radio sidearm bloodied to hell. We dumped it. Any recovered footage? No body cam. She ditched it. Hayes clicked, his tongue disappointed. We needed her to vanish quietly. Now we have to stage the scene. Locals can do it. Blame the militia. Same playbook. She was the only one carrying the Afghan files. If she went down, the mission would vanish with her. Kane forced her face to stay slack, even as the realization sank in that they already knew what she'd been assigned to dig into. They assumed she was out cold, that the blood made her weak, that a hole in her chest meant she was finished. They were wrong, and when one of them leaned in too close, they'd learn just how wrong. Hayes knelt beside her. She could feel his breath, the bitter tang of coffee, and nicotine on his jacket as he tapped her vest. Bulletproof ain't the same as heartproof, he said, then almost reverently. Too bad. You look like you could survive anything. He stood. Finish it, burn the place. Footsteps receded, and Kane cracked an eye open, starting to move. The floor bit into her back with splintered wood. Light shifting through the broken rafters as gold-tinged dust settled into the ruin. She lay where they'd left her, blood drying at her throat, the vest buckled just enough to show the cracked trauma plate beneath. Her chest felt as if someone had lit a small fire inside it and ordered her not to move. Each breath hissed through clenched teeth. But it was still breath, and she was still here. She reached inward not to think, but to find center, to separate pain from purpose. Slow, shallow breaths anchoring to one point at a time. Memories came. Week 5 surf. Frozen sand. Drown proofing with Iron Jim, watching demanding more than the human body was designed to give. His mantra returned. Your body will scream that it's dying, but your job is to move anyway. Kane moved just a little, fingers curling over the splintered floor testing, then sliding an arm beneath her to fish for anything sharp. A broken beam, a nail, then metal under her palm. A rifle. Unloaded, safety off, probably left by one of the idiots who thought she was done. She checked the chamber. Empty, but the magazine pouch stayed latched on the sling. God bless laziness. She rolled like a corpse, easing out of rigor. One elbow, then the other, hauling her torso upright as ribs screamed and the world spun. She bit her lip hard enough to draw blood just to stay conscious. Footsteps sounded outside, casual, confident. 2 men, one humming, one on a radio. Told you, dead as hell. Nobody survives a hit like that. Wrap her and dump the body. Burn the rest. Zero evidence. A man stepped through the blown doorway with a rifle slung across his chest, not even looking directly at the pack on the ground, the same one they'd ripped from her an hour earlier. He turned his back. Big mistake. Kane moved up fast, half staggering, half driving on pure will. Pain threatened to black her out, but her hand had already closed on the magazine. She slammed it into the rifle, racked the slide, and put a round clean into the base of the first man's skull before he could finish turning. The second barely had a finger to the trigger when her second round punched into his clavicle. Her third shot tapped the head, and he dropped like a sandbag. Silence fell, broken only by the sharp rasp of her breath. Ragged breath and the slow, steady drip of blood from her vest onto the floorboards. 3 minutes passed like that. She kept perfectly still until a voice crackled over the enemy radio, clipped to the fallen man's chest. Confirm execution. Where's the photo? Kane snatched the radio and pressed the send button, her voice flat and cold. This is Kane. You shot me in the chest. You should have aimed higher. Static filled the line, then silence. No jokes, no laughter, just panic seeping through like gas in a closed room. She stripped the first man's kit from his corpse, snapping open the utility belt and pulling only what she needed. Fresh mags, a sidearm, a knife, a flashbang, and a few painkillers followed. She ground 2 pills between her teeth. Not enough to fix what was broken, just enough to keep her upright. Kane glanced at her vest, split clean, ceramic shattered and soaked red, but the trident badge over her heart still shone. The plate was cracked, but the symbol held. Her ribs could be broken, her lung punctured, but her will remained. So did the fight. If anyone wanted a heart to break, they'd chosen the wrong one. The fortress wasn't much, but for now, it was hers. She moved like a machine that had been hit too many times yet refused to stop. Each step deliberate, each breath measured. Pain a constant pressure behind her ribs and a throb under her collarbone she now wore like armor. From the dead men, she salvaged 2 rifles, 3 loaded magazines, a half-empty med kit, and a comms radio, still tuned to the enemy net. Crouched by a crumbling wall, she flipped it open. Static fizzed, then a clipped voice cut through. Confirm kill, no photos received, you're running out of time. Another answered nervous, unfamiliar. Team 3 went dark. No visual on target body. She might be negative. She's dead, shot through the heart. Finish cleanup. Burn everything. Kane smiled through blood-slick teeth. They still thought she was a ghost with a clock ticking above her head, and that belief would be their undoing. She keyed the mic voice steady and low. "This is Kane. I told you already. Next time aim higher." 5 seconds of dead air, then frantic noise. "She's alive." "How is she alive?" "Sweep the fortress. Move now." Kane tossed the radio aside. Less than 2 minutes to act. She started with the door, wedging a broken beam at shoulder height and tying it with paracord to a grenade pin, so anyone forcing it would take the blast in the chest. Next came the stairs, a tripwire at the base rigged to a flashbang nested in a rusty tin can. Non-lethal but blinding enough to buy her time. Upstairs, if it could be called, that was a collapsed loft with a crawl space just big enough for a firing nest. She propped a busted chair leg to hold a shutter open for sight. Her rifle rested on that improvised perch, muzzle steady, sight lines locked on the narrow road below. Everything else empty, bottles, shattered glass. A charred blanket became camouflage to hide her movement and conceal reloads. She waited not like prey, but like a spider, patient and still. The first man slipped through the window, quiet knife in hand, no radio chatter. She put a round through his temple before his boots hit the floor. Then the door detonated, her trap worked. The grenade tore half the entrance apart and sent a second man crashing into the wall hard enough to splinter wood. He didn't rise. The enemy radio screamed in panic. Team 4 status. She keyed from her prone position upstairs, voice low and steady. "Down 2, request immediate reinforcements." "I'm still here," came the taunt over the enemy net. "You're bluffing. Come find out." She moved again fast, despite the fire behind her ribs sliding to the corner, where moonlight leaked through gaps in the roof and cast thin ribbons across the floor. Outside, she could hear them now shouting and arguing, someone losing control. And that was exactly what she wanted. Anger makes people sloppy. A voice cut the night, pumped through a portable loudspeaker. "Major Kane, last chance. You're wounded, surrounded, no escape." She said nothing. Instead, she tossed a flare into the courtyard so it bloomed a blinding red, then dropped a second flare and shot the third clean through a man's throat as he tried to flank right. A fourth screamed and ran, and she let him go. Fear would spread the message for her. Inside the fortress, her chest ripped with every breath. Each inhale a knife. But her mind stayed sharp. She was no longer merely surviving. She was shaping the battlefield, flipping the kill box they dragged her into, so that now the fortress was a trap. And she held the trigger. Then a shot cracked the night. Sharp, clean, impossibly close. A round slammed into the wooden beam inches above her head and showered her in splinters. She hit the floor with her breath caught and knew this wasn't the same crew she'd been bleeding against all night. This was someone patient, someone else. She thumbed the enemy radio next to her and swapped frequencies. A new voice drifted in, calm and smooth, not panicked like the others. The last shot had been a warning. She didn't answer the bait. The voice said, "You're clever, I'll give you that. Fortress traps, the fake death, the calm stunt. I've seen it before." She stayed silent until he added, "I don't rush, I don't shout, and I don't miss twice." And she recognized the cadence of a marksman's ego disguised as respect. She raised the mic slowly and said low and steady, "I'm not like the ones you killed. Let's see what happens when neither of us misses." A short chuckle came back and a name. "Daniel Hayes, former Delta. How about you?" "Major Morgan Kane, United States Navy SEAL," she answered. And when he said, the Iron Heart, she realized they'd already been trading nicknames. She eased away from his sightline and crawled toward the side window. She didn't need to find him yet, only to make him think she was trying. "You know I've got you boxed in," Hayes said, and she angled a shard of broken car glass as a mirror through the gap in the frame to scan. Movement on the top of the northern ridge, maybe 200 meters out. A half-crouched silhouette between two boulders, long barrel, no muzzle flash. Suppressed. Good position, low wind, but arrogance was the mistake. He talked too much, so she moved out through a hole in the sidewall, low across broken soil, using collapsed stone fencing to mask her silhouette. Her rifle strapped to her back for balance rather than firepower, because at 200 meters she couldn't outgun him, but she could outwalk him. "You know this wasn't personal," Hayes continued. "You were just asking too many questions about Project Olympus." The name made her freeze for half a second. Project Olympus, the operation Hayes had mentioned earlier when she'd questioned his authority. "Should I know what that is?" she asked, moving again, circling wide through a dry creek bed. That depends on whether you've figured out what those drone feeds were really sending. She had, but didn't admit it. Those feeds weren't just for surveillance. They were transmitting coordinates to someone else, targeting data. Kane reached the base of the ridge, paused, listened, as haze shifted, then climbed fast and low, weaving between boulders. Your father would have understood the necessity, Hayes said. Old school Cold War pragmatism. Sometimes alliances have to be unofficial. 50 meters, 30, 10. My father didn't sell out his country, she replied, climbing the last few meters silently. Neither did I, Hayes shot back. I'm protecting it. The Black Dossier would have exposed operations going back to the Soviet era. Operations that built America's power. The director understands that. He was there. She heard him exhale, slow, centered, drawing his breath for another shot. Then she rose from the slope like smoke with her rifle aimed dead center as his head turned. His eyes widened and she fired once center mass. The round slammed into him hard enough to drop his scope. He stumbled back against the boulder, but his armor caught the hit and held. He reached for his sidearm fast and trained, but her second shot ripped into his upper thigh and he screamed as he fell. She closed the last few feet while he crawled toward his rifle. She kicked it away. He looked up, pain smeared across his face, disbelief swirling in his eyes. How, he rasped. Major Morgan Kane stood over him, chest heaving, rifle aimed steady. I moved, she said simply. He tried to grin through blood. You're not supposed to be alive. She tilted her head slightly. That's the problem with shooting someone in the chest. You assume you hit the heart. Then she pulled the trigger. One clean professional shot like everything she'd done tonight. She slung the sniper's rifle across her shoulder and stepped back from the body. No words left to say. The man who thought he could end her with one bullet had just learned what the world was about to find out. The Iron Heart doesn't stop until the mission's over. She searched his body quickly, professionally, finding a satellite phone and a small tablet computer. The tablet was locked, but she pocketed it anyway. Someone would know how to crack it. The pain in her chest was becoming unbearable, the adrenaline beginning to fade. She knew she needed to find shelter to treat her wounds properly, or she'd be dead by morning. Kane was preparing to move when a familiar voice crackled across the radio. One she hadn't heard in years, low-graveled, unmistakable. Sierra 1-6, this is Iron Hammer. Authenticate Charlie Echo. Her breath caught. Only one man used that call sign, Colonel James Westbrook. For a moment, she thought she might be hallucinating from blood loss. The old man had retired years ago, but the authentication code was correct, and the voice was too perfect an imitation to be fake. She keyed the radio. Iron Hammer, this is Sierra 1-6. Authenticate Tango Lima. A pause then, authentication confirmed, Sitrep Major. Kane leaned against the rock, suddenly aware of how close to collapse she truly was. Multiple casualties. Team scattered. I'm wounded but mobile. Took a round to the chest. Tangos identified as private contractors, not insurgents. This was a setup. Location: ridge north of ambush site. One hostile force eliminated, unknown numbers still active in the area. Understood. Hold position. Sir, she hesitated. What the hell are you doing on this frequency? You're supposed to be retired. A dry chuckle came through the static. Some retirements are more active than others, Kane. Now conserve your energy. Help is inbound. The transmission cut. Kane slumped against the boulder. The tablet in her pocket suddenly felt heavier, more significant. Whatever was on it had been worth killing her entire team for. Worth bringing a retired legend back into the field. Project Olympus, the Black Dossier, the director. She stared at the night sky, vast and indifferent above the mountains. Something big was happening, something that reached back to the Cold War and forward to whatever this covert arms operation was planning. And somehow she'd stumbled right into the middle of it. The body breaks first, she whispered to herself, Iron Jim's words becoming her mantra. The heart breaks last. The tablet might contain the answers, but first she had to survive the night. Down in the valley, fresh gunfire erupted. Someone was engaging the remaining hostiles. Iron Hammer was moving. Major Morgan Kane checked her weapon, swallowed the pain, and began her descent. Her mission wasn't over. The heart keeps beating until you decide it's done. And Morgan Kane wasn't finished yet. Dawn broke across the mountains in shades of blood and gold. Morgan Kane had survived the night, but barely. She'd found shelter in a small cave halfway down the ridge, concealed by scrub brush and loose stone. The kind of place only someone with survival training would recognize as viable cover. The kind of place Iron Jim Westbrook had taught her to look for during SEER training. survival, evasion, resistance, escape. Four simple words that define the difference between coming home and not. Her chest felt as though someone had driven railroad spikes between her ribs. Each breath came shallow and wet. The bullet had penetrated her armor, cracked the ceramic plate, and though it hadn't entered her body, the impact had shattered at least two ribs and driven bone fragments into her lung. A sucking chest wound that would kill most people within hours. But Morgan Kane wasn't most people. She leaned against cold stone medical supplies spread before her in meticulous order. The half-empty combat medic kit she'd taken from one of the dead mercenaries contained just enough to keep her alive. Field dressings, combat gauze impregnated with clotting agents, a packaged chest seal for penetrating wounds, two morphine auto-injectors, a roll of medical tape. Not enough for a hospital save, but enough for what Iron Jim called battlefield medicine. Enough to keep you alive until the real doctors arrived. If they arrived, Kane pulled open her shredded uniform, revealing the livid bruising across her sternum, dark purple spreading outward like ink and water from the point of impact. The bullet had struck just above her heart, half an inch lower, and no amount of battlefield medicine would have mattered. The radio beside her crackled with intermittent chatter. Enemy forces still searching the ridgeline, still hunting for her body, still not believing she could be alive. No sign of target, possible animal drag. Check the ravines. Copy. Team 2 moving to Eastern Slope. She silenced the volume and focused on her wounds. First priority, the sucking chest wound. She tore open the chest seal package with her teeth, positioned the adhesive patch over the place where bone had punctured lung, and pressed it firmly into place. The valve would allow air to escape, but prevent it from being drawn back in. A temporary fix for a wound that required surgery. The pain nearly caused her to black out. Sweat beaded on her forehead as darkness crowded the edges of her vision. Steady, she whispered to herself. Steady. Next, the blood loss. The impact trauma had ruptured blood vessels throughout her chest cavity, internal bleeding that couldn't be easily addressed in the field. She'd lost at least 2 pints already, judging by the lightheadedness and the cold spreading through her extremities. She broke open one morphine injector but hesitated. Pain was information, not a command to stop. Another of Iron Jim's lessons from Hell Week. Morphine would dull the pain, but also dull her reflexes, her awareness. And in her current situation, that could mean death. She recapped the injector. Not yet. Not until absolutely necessary. Instead, she forced herself to stand using the cave wall for support. Movement was critical to maintaining circulation and preventing shock. Slow, deliberate steps, breathing through the pain, focusing her mind beyond it. The SEAL training had prepared her for this. The drown-proofing exercises where instructors tied your hands behind your back and dropped you in deep water. The oxygen deprivation drills that pushed your body to the edge of consciousness. The 60-hour marches through hypothermic conditions with no sleep. All designed to teach one lesson: the body's limits are not the mind's limits. As she moved, her thoughts turned to the tablet she'd taken from Hayes. Whatever Project Olympus was, whatever this black dossier contained, it was significant enough to warrant the elimination of an entire SEAL team. A sanctioned hit on American forces by American contractors. Someone powerful was pulling the strings. The mysterious director Hayes had mentioned. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the tablet. Standard military-grade ruggedized case, encrypted access. The screen glowed softly in the dim cave, demanding credentials she didn't possess. But Kane hadn't survived this long by giving up easily. She pulled a small toolkit from her vest pocket and carefully disassembled the tablet's protective casing. Inside, a standard circuit board with one particular feature that brought a grim smile to her bloodied lips: a maintenance port. During her cross-training with Naval Intelligence 3 years ago, she'd learned about backdoor access protocols for secure devices. The kind of knowledge the brass preferred remained within specialized units, but which occasionally transferred during joint operations. She connected a thin wire from her tactical radio to the maintenance port, powered up the radio to a specific frequency, and began broadcasting a patterned series of tones. After 90 seconds of electronic handshaking, the tablet screen changed from a login prompt to a command line interface. "Let's see what you're hiding," she whispered. The files were still encrypted, but the directory structure was visible. Dozens of folders labeled with operation names and dates stretching back 30 years. Chimera, Blackwing, Sentinel, Olympus. She opened Olympus first. Images appeared. Shipping manifests, flight plans, financial transactions. Weapon systems being moved through unofficial channels to destinations that weren't supposed to receive them. American-made missiles and targeting systems flowing to regimes officially under sanction. Money flowing back to numbered accounts. Then personnel files. CIA officers, military contractors, former special forces operators recruited into something called the program. And they're labeled as operational controller, a name that made her blood run cold despite her already chilled state. General Malcolm Hargrove, former head of Special Operations Command, now ostensibly retired, but apparently serving as the director of whatever shadow organization this was. Kane stared at the screen. Hargrove was a legend in military circles. Bronze Star, Silver Star, Distinguished Service Cross, 4 decades of service culminating in one of the highest positions in special operations. A man whose picture hung in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes. And apparently a traitor. She scrolled further, looking for connections, for context, for anything that might explain why a decorated general would betray his country. Then she found it, a folder labeled Cold War Assets. Inside were documents dating back to the 1980s, operation names she'd never heard of, covert actions during the final decade of the Soviet Union, arms deals with anti-communist forces in Afghanistan, Central America, Africa, billions in untraceable funds moving through shell corporations and offshore accounts. Not officially sanctioned operations, but private initiatives run by elements within American intelligence. A shadow war funded by black market weapons sales. Operations that should have ended with the fall of the Berlin Wall, but which instead evolved into something else. A self-perpetuating enterprise that continued selling arms and influence long after its original purpose had vanished. And at the center of it all, a young Colonel Malcolm Hargrove, building the infrastructure that would eventually become Project Olympus. The tablet contained enough evidence to topple governments, to put dozens of highly placed officials behind bars for the rest of their lives. The kind of information men killed to protect. No wonder Hayes had been so desperate to confirm her death. No wonder an entire SEAL team had been considered acceptable collateral damage. She'd stumbled into something far bigger than a routine patrol gone wrong. She'd stumbled into a decades-long conspiracy at the highest levels of military command. The radio suddenly burst to life loud enough to startle her, despite the lowered volume. All units priority target. The package is moving. Repeat, the package is moving. Kane frowned. The package, were they talking about her? Had they somehow tracked her location? Confirmed visual on Iron Hammer team. 8 operators moving north by northeast through Sector 3. Heavy weapons. Tactical approach. Iron Hammer. Westbrook's call sign. He was coming for her with a rescue team. But how had he assembled a force so quickly in this remote region, and how had he known where to look? Unless a cold realization washed over her. Westbrook had known about the ambush. Had to have known. He'd been monitoring the frequency. Had authentication codes ready, had a team standing by. But was he coming to rescue her or to silence her? Decades of Cold War operations. Billions in black market deals. A system that had operated in shadows for 30 years. Would her former mentor kill to protect those secrets? The Iron Jim she knew was a patriot, a man who lived and breathed duty to country. But he was also a product of the Cold War, a man who believed that sometimes the ends justified the means. A man who had taught her that in the world of special operations, official policy and operational reality often diverged. What really matters, Kane, he'd told her once, isn't what's written in the manual. It's completing the mission. It's protecting American interests, whatever it takes. Had those words been a warning she'd failed to heed, Kane closed the tablet and slipped it back into her pocket. Whether Westbrook was coming as friend or foe, she needed to be ready. She checked her weapons. The rifle she'd taken from Hayes was a MK-17 SCAR standard issue for Special Operations Forces. 3 magazines remaining 20 rounds each. The sidearm was a SIG P226 15-round magazine with 1 in the chamber. Enough firepower to hold off a small force, but not enough for a prolonged engagement, especially not in her condition. She needed to move to find a more defensible position. If Westbrook was coming to help, she'd be better positioned to link up. If he was coming to finish the job Hayes started, she'd have better odds of survival. Either way, this cave had served its purpose. Kane gathered her supplies and moved to the entrance, scanning the terrain below. The morning sun cast long shadows across the valley, providing some concealment if she stayed in the tree line. To the north, she could make out the faint sound of helicopter rotors. Someone was coming in fast. She made her decision. south toward the remains of the ancient fortress where they'd first dumped her body. It would provide cover, multiple escape routes, and a vantage point to observe Westbrook's approach. If his intentions proved hostile, the stone walls would provide better protection than open ground. Moving with the deliberate care of a wounded predator, Kane began her descent down the ridge. Every step sent shards of agony through her chest. The chest seal held, but she could feel blood pooling in her thoracic cavity with each motion. Breathing became increasingly difficult. Twice she had to stop and lean against trees or on a chair, fighting to remain conscious. But still she moved forward. The body breaks first, the heart breaks last. It took nearly an hour to reach the fortress, a journey that would have taken 15 minutes at full health. By the time she slipped through a partially collapsed wall into the interior courtyard, the helicopter sounds had grown louder. Whoever was coming would arrive soon. She climbed to the upper level, finding a position that allowed her to observe approaches from all directions while providing cover from ground fire. Then she waited rifle ready, controlling her breathing to minimize pain and maximize focus. The Black Hawk appeared over the eastern ridge 10 minutes later. Standard military configuration, but without markings. The kind of aircraft used for operations where deniability was essential. It circled once, then descended toward a small clearing half a mile north of the fortress. 8 figures fast roped to the ground while the helicopter maintained a hover position. Tactical deployment by the book. The kind of insertion Iron Jim had personally refined during his years commanding special operations units. Kane watched through her rifle scope as the team formed a perimeter, then began moving in her direction. Professional, disciplined, weapons ready but not firing blindly. These weren't the same mercenaries she'd encountered earlier. These were top-tier operator, and at their center, unmistakable, even at this distance, the broad-shouldered figure of Colonel James Westbrook. Iron Jim himself moving with the fluid confidence of a man half his age, directing his team with hand signals that Kane recognized from years of training under his command. She kept her scope trained on him, finger resting lightly beside the trigger guard. Not on the trigger itself, not yet. First, she needed to know his intentions. The team approached methodically, sweeping each potential hiding spot, maintaining perfect spacing. 300 meters, 200, 100. At 75 meters, Westbrook held up his fist. The team stopped instantly. He raised a radio to his lips. A moment later, Kane's own radio crackled. Sierra 1-6, this is Iron Hammer. Area secure. Show yourself. Kane remained silent, watching through her scope. This could still be a trap. Kane, I know you're listening. I know you're injured. And I know you've seen the files. We need to talk. So he knew about the tablet, knew she'd accessed its contents. That confirmed her suspicions that Westbrook was connected to Project Olympus somehow. The question was how. Sierra 1-6, if I wanted you dead, I wouldn't have brought a medical team. Doc Matthews is here. You remember him from Bud's training. He can treat those broken ribs and that punctured lung. But only if you show yourself. Clock's ticking, Kane. You've lost too much blood already. Matthews. The name registered. Senior Chief Petty Officer Thomas Matthews, the medical instructor who taught her combat trauma care during SEAL qualification. A good man, someone she trusted. But even good men could be compromised. Last chance, Kane, Westbrook's voice continued. Hargrove's men are still in the area. 3 teams closing in on our position. We need to extract now. That got her attention. If Westbrook and Hargrove were on opposing sides, then maybe, just maybe, the old man wasn't here to silence her. She keyed her radio. Authentication protocol. What was the last thing you said to me at my trident ceremony? A pause, then Westbrook's voice returned softer now. The body breaks first, the heart last. Never forget. Words only the 2 of them had shared, words no one else could know. Kane exhaled slowly. Upper level north wall. I'm coming out. Any of your men point weapons at me, I start shooting. Understood. She rose carefully, keeping her rifle at the ready, but not directly aimed. Pain screamed through her torso with the movement, but she forced herself to stand straight to appear stronger than she was. Perception was often the difference between life and death. Westbrook saw her first. His weathered face showed no surprise at her condition, only grim determination. He signaled his men to hold position, then walked forward alone, his own weapon slung across his back in a deliberate display of trust. You look like hell, Kane, he said when he reached the base of the wall. Feel worse, she admitted, still not lowering her rifle. That chest wound needs immediate attention. You've got hours at most before hypoxia sets in. Why are you here, sir, and how did you know about the ambush? Westbrook's face hardened. I didn't know about the ambush. I knew you were investigating supply discrepancies that might lead back to Project Olympus. I've been monitoring the situation for months. When your team went dark and Hargrove's contractors started celebrating, I put the pieces together. And what exactly is your connection to Olympus? Your name isn't in the files I found. A thin smile crossed the old colonel's face. Of course it isn't. I made sure of that 30 years ago when I started building a case against Hargrove and his operation. I was deep cover Kane, have been since 1980. Kane's mind raced processing this new information against what she'd seen in the tablet. You're saying you've been investigating Project Olympus for 3 decades. That's not possible. No deep cover operation runs that long. This one did, because it had to. Because what Hargrove built during the Cold War evolved into something much more dangerous after the Soviet collapse. A private arms network with tentacles reaching into every major conflict zone globally. Billions in weapons and influence peddled by men who swore an oath to protect this country, not profit from its wars. He gestured toward her pocket where the tablet rested. That black dossier contains enough evidence to bring down Hargrove and 20 other senior officials. Names, dates, bank accounts, operational details. I've spent my entire career collecting it piece by piece. If what you're saying is true, why not bring it to Justice Department years ago? Why wait until now? Westbrook's eyes darkened. Because the network was too powerful, too protected. I needed absolute proof that would stand up in court. And I needed someone I could trust completely to help bring it to light. He looked directly at her. That's why I made sure you got assigned to this mission, Kane. Because you're the one person Hargrove wouldn't suspect. The one operator with the skills and integrity to finish what I started. Kane's rifle didn't waver. So you used me as bait, set me up to trigger Hargrove's paranoia. I gave you the opportunity to uncover the truth. I didn't know Hayes would try to kill you. Didn't know Hargrove had authorized a hit on American forces. The old man's voice carried genuine regret. For that, I'll never forgive myself. Before Kane could respond, gunfire erupted from the ridge to the east. Bullets impacted stone around them as Westbrook's team returned fire seeking cover. We're out of time, Westbrook shouted. Hargrove's cleanup crew is here. We need to move now. Kane hesitated only a moment longer, then made her decision. She lowered her rifle and nodded. Your medic better be as good as you say. He's better, Westbrook replied, keying his radio. Matthews North Wall urgent trauma care. The rest of you defensive positions. We hold until extract arrives. The firefight intensified as a stocky man with a medical pack sprinted toward their position, keeping low as rounds snapped overhead. Kane recognized Matthews instantly, though years had added silver to his once dark hair. Major Kane, he said professionally, already opening his kit. Let's take a look at that chest wound. She allowed Matthews to guide her into a protected alcove as Westbrook coordinated the defense. The medic cut away her bloodied shirt and carefully removed the makeshift chest seal she'd applied. His expression remained neutral, but she caught the brief flash of concern in his eyes. Pneumothorax with hemothorax. At least 2 shattered ribs. Possible clavicle fracture. You've been moving on this for how long? About 12 hours. Matthews shook his head in disbelief as he prepared a proper chest tube. That's impossible. You should be dead. So I've been told. The medic worked quickly, inserting the tube between her ribs to drain accumulated blood and air from the pleural cavity. The relief was almost instant, though the procedure itself sent fresh waves of agony through her body. I'm giving you fentanyl for the pain, Matthews said, preparing an injection. Just enough to take the edge off without compromising your awareness. Kane didn't argue this time. With an active firefight underway, she needed to be functional. The synthetic opioid spread cool relief through her system within seconds, dulling the worst of the pain while leaving her mind clear. That'll hold you for now, Matthews said, taping the chest tube in place and wrapping her torso with fresh bandages. But you need surgery within the next 6 hours. That lung won't heal on its own. Understood, Kane replied, already feeling stronger as her breathing improved. Help me up. Outside their shelter, the battle had intensified. Westbrook's men had established a perimeter around the fortress, using the ancient stone walls for cover as they engaged multiple enemy positions on the surrounding ridgelines. Professional disciplined fire. Controlled bursts rather than panicked volleys. Kane retrieved her rifle and moved to Westbrook's position, crouching behind a collapsed column as rounds impacted nearby. Situation, she asked. The old colonel nodded toward the eastern ridge. 2 enemy squads, heavy weapons. They've got us pinned down. Extract is 15 minutes out, but we need to clear a landing zone. What about Sullivan? Any sign of my team? Westbrook's expression tightened. Still looking. Our satellite picked up heat signatures in a ravine 2 clicks west. Could be survivors holding position. Could be nothing. Hope flickered in Kane's chest. Sullivan was a survivor. If anyone from her team had made it through the ambush, it would be him. We need to reach that ravine, she said. First, we need to survive the next 15 minutes. Hargrove's men aren't here to take prisoners. As if to emphasize his point, a rocket-propelled grenade streaked toward their position, impacting the wall 30 feet away and showering them with ancient stone fragments. They're pressing the attack, Westbrook observed, trying to overwhelm us before extract arrives. Kane studied the battlefield through her rifle scope, noting enemy positions, fields of fire, potential avenues of approach. Despite the pain medication, each breath still burned, but her mind was clearing, tactical awareness returning. We can't hold here, she concluded. Too exposed. We need to fall back to the eastern buildings. Better cover fewer angles of attack. Westbrook nodded in agreement. My assessment exactly. I'll coordinate the withdrawal. You're in no condition to move quickly. I'll cover the retreat, Kane replied. Give me one of your men and the spare ammo. We'll lay down suppressing fire while the rest of you relocate. The colonel hesitated, clearly concerned about her condition, then nodded sharply. Johnson ammo drop for Major Kane, then stay on her position. Cover fire for team withdrawal on my mark. A young operator slid into position beside Kane, depositing extra magazines before setting up his own firing position. Ready when you are, ma'am. Kane checked her weapon, calculating angles and rates of fire. Focus on the ridgeline positions. 3-second bursts varied targets. Make them keep their heads down. Yes, ma'am. Westbrook's voice came over the radio. Execute in 3, 2, 1. Mark. Kane and Johnson opened fire simultaneously, their rifles hammering out controlled bursts that swept across enemy positions. The rest of the team moved in disciplined bounds, 2 men running, while others provided cover, leapfrogging toward the better protected eastern structure. Enemy fire intensified, focusing on Kane's position as they recognized the tactical withdrawal. Bullets chipped stone inches from her head, but she maintained her fire discipline, targeting muzzle flashes and movement rather than spraying rounds blindly. Team clear, Westbrook's voice reported. Pull back now. Roger that, Kane responded. Johnson, go. I'll be right behind you. The young operator hesitated. With respect, ma'am, I'm not leaving you exposed. That wasn't a request, operator. Johnson's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Moving now. Cover in 3 seconds. He sprinted from cover as Kane laid down another burst of suppressing fire. Once he was clear, she prepared to move herself, gathering the remaining ammunition and taking a deep breath despite the stabbing pain it caused. She was about to break cover when movement caught her peripheral vision. A figure on the far ridge, different from the others. Standing rather than prone, observing rather than firing. She swung her scope toward the figure and felt her blood go cold. General Malcolm Hargrove, the director himself, watching the battle through binoculars flanked by 2 security personnel. The man responsible for the ambush that killed her team. The architect of Project Olympus. The traitor Westbrook had spent 30 years investigating. And he was less than 800 meters away, well within effective range of her rifle. Kane settled her breathing, feeling time slow around her as she aligned the crosshairs. One shot, one chance to end this now, to avenge her team and prevent Hargrove from disappearing back into the shadows. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Kane, move now. Westbrook's urgent voice crackled through her radio. She held the sight picture, compensating for distance and wind. A shot she'd made 1,000 times on the range. A shot that would end Project Olympus with a single 7.62 millimeter round. Kane, RPG incoming, move. The warning penetrated her focus just as she glimpsed the vapor trail of an incoming rocket. She rolled sideways as the RPG slammed into her position, the explosion lifting her off the ground and hurling her through the air like a rag doll. She crashed into a stone wall 10 feet away, the impact sending fresh agony through her already damaged body. Dust and debris rained down as her vision blurred. Her ears rang with a high-pitched whine that drowned out all other sound. Through the haze, she saw Hargrove lowering his binoculars. Even at this distance, she could sense his satisfaction. He'd identified her position, targeted her specifically, and now he believed he'd finished the job Hayes had failed to complete. Then the general turned and walked away, disappearing behind the ridge as his forces continued their assault. Kane tried to move but found her body unresponsive. The chest tube Matthews had inserted was gone, torn away by the blast. Blood flowed freely down her side. She could feel the familiar tightness returning to her lung as air and blood accumulated in the pleural cavity. Darkness crowded the edges of her vision. Not the temporary darkness of pain or shock, but something deeper, something final. So this is how it ends, she thought distantly. Not by a bullet to the heart, but by a rocket to the stone. Her hand fumbled weakly for her sidearm, determined to at least defend herself if Hargrove's men came to confirm the kill. But even that simple movement required more strength than she had left. The tablet containing the black dossier pressed against her side, still secure in her pocket. All that evidence, all those secrets about to be buried with her body. Westbrook's 30-year mission failed in its final moments. I'm sorry, Iron Jim, she thought as consciousness began to fade. I wasn't strong enough. Then hands were on her, pulling her from the rubble. Strong arms lifting her broken body. A familiar voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. Stay with me, Kane. Don't you dare check out now. Westbrook. The old colonel had come back for her, exposing himself to enemy fire to retrieve her from the collapsed position. The tablet, she managed to gasp. To hell with the tablet. We're getting you out of here. He carried her toward the eastern structure, bullets impacting around them as Hargrove's forces concentrated fire on their exposed position. Twice Kane felt Westbrook stumble as rounds passed near them, but he never dropped her, never slowed. The 68-year-old colonel moved with the determined strength of a man refusing to accept defeat, ignoring the danger, ignoring the odds, focused only on reaching safety with his wounded operator. They reached the eastern building as the rest of the team provided covering fire. Matthews was waiting, his medical kit already open, as Westbrook gently lowered Kane to the ground. RPG blast, the colonel reported tersely. Chest tube compromised. She's drowning in her own blood. Matthews worked with practiced efficiency, cutting away the shredded remains of Kane's uniform to assess the new damage. His expression remained professional, but his eyes betrayed the gravity of her condition. Multiple new traumas, pneumothorax returning, possible internal hemorrhage. He looked up at Westbrook. I need to reinsert the chest tube now or we lose her. Do it, the colonel ordered, turning back toward the defensive positions. Extract ETA 3 minutes. We need to hold. Kane felt herself floating somehow above the situation, detached from her body, as Matthews worked to save her life. The pain had receded, replaced by a strange, peaceful numbness that she recognized as a dangerous sign. The body begins to shut down as death approaches. Systems failing one by one as the brain redirects limited oxygen to essential functions. Another lesson from SEER training. The final stages of hypothermia and severe blood loss. She tried to focus on Westbrook as he coordinated the defense, tried to draw strength from his unwavering determination. The old man had risked everything to save her, not just from Hargrove's men, but from her own suspicions. Had proven his loyalty when it mattered most. The tablet. She needed to tell him about the tablet, about what she'd seen, about Hargrove's presence on the ridge. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her body refused to respond to even the simplest commands now. The last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was the distinctive thrum of helicopter rotors approaching fast, and Matthew's voice urgent but distant. She's crashing. We're losing her. Then nothing. Beep, beep, beep. The steady rhythm of a cardiac monitor pulled Kane slowly back to consciousness. Soft light filtered through her eyelids. The antiseptic smell of a medical facility surrounded her. She was alive. Pain returned with awareness, though dulled by what she recognized as medical-grade morphine. Her chest felt tight, restricted by bandages and surgical dressings. An oxygen tube ran beneath her nose, and an IV line fed into her left arm. She opened her eyes slowly, allowing them to adjust to the light. White walls, medical equipment, a standard recovery room in what appeared to be a military hospital. Welcome back to the land of the living. The voice came from her right. She turned her head carefully to find Colonel James Westbrook sitting in a chair beside her bed. The old man looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and fresh bandages visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. He'd been wounded during the extraction, she realized. Wounded while carrying her to safety. How long? She asked, her voice a dry rasp. 3 days. They put you in a medically induced coma for the first 48 hours. Multiple surgeries to repair the damage to your lung and remove bone fragments from your chest cavity. He leaned forward. The doctors said if Matthews hadn't reestablished the chest tube when he did, you wouldn't have made it to the helicopter. Kane tried to sit up, but found the movement beyond her current capabilities. Sullivan, my team. Two survivors. Master Chief Sullivan and Petty Officer Rodriguez. Both wounded but stable. They managed to fight their way to a ravine after the ambush and establish a defensive position. Sullivan got a distress call out on an emergency frequency that one of my monitoring stations picked up. Relief flooded through her. At least some of her men had made it. At least Sullivan had survived. The tablet, she asked next. The black dossier. Westbrook patted his chest pocket. Secure, I pulled it from your vest while Matthews was working on you. Everything's still there, including the files you accessed. It's the smoking gun we've needed for 30 years. I saw Hargrove, Kane said, at the ridgeline. He was there directing the attack personally. The colonel nodded grimly. We know our surveillance drones captured his presence. It's the final piece of evidence we needed. Proof that he personally ordered an attack on American forces. What happens now? Westbrook's weathered face hardened. Now we finish this. The Justice Department has convened a special grand jury based on the evidence in the black dossier. Sealed indictments are being prepared for Hargrove and 19 other conspirators connected to Project Olympus. Simultaneous arrests will take place within the next 24 hours. Hargrove won't go quietly, Kane observed. No, he won't. That's why I'm here. The colonel leaned closer. The FBI believes Hargrove has become aware of the pending indictments. Intelligence suggests he's preparing to flee the country, likely within the next 12 hours. He has a private airfield in Northern Virginia where a jet is being prepared for immediate departure. Kane understood immediately. You're mounting an intercept operation. Correct. My team is staging now. We'll take him at the airfield before he can board the aircraft. I want in, Kane said automatically, then winced as pain shot through her chest. Westbrook smiled slightly. You're in no condition to leave that bed, let alone participate in a high-risk apprehension. The doctors say you're looking at 6 weeks minimum recovery time before you're even cleared for light duty. Sir, with all due respect, Hargrove killed my team. He tried to kill me. Twice. I deserve to be there when you take him down. The colonel studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he sighed. There might be a way, not on the ground team obviously, but we'll have surveillance drones providing overhead coverage. You could monitor from the command center. Be my eyes in the sky. He paused. Assuming the doctors clear you for a wheelchair and a few hours away from this bed. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was better than nothing. A chance to witness Hargrove's downfall, even if she couldn't personally put the handcuffs on him. I'll take it, she said. I thought you might. Westbrook stood, wincing slightly as he put weight on his injured leg. Rest now. I'll have the doctors evaluate you in the morning. If they clear you, we'll arrange transport to the command center. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. By the way, there's something you should know. The medical team has started calling you Iron Heart around the hospital. Apparently surviving a point-blank chest shot and continuing to fight for 24 hours afterward has made something of an impression. Despite the pain, Kane felt a smile tug at her lips. Wonder where they got that nickname. Westbrook's eyes crinkled. Can't imagine. Get some rest, Major. Tomorrow we finish this. After the colonel departed, Kane lay back against the pillows considering all that had happened. From the ambush in Afghanistan to this hospital bed, she traveled a journey few would understand or believe, had confronted death more intimately than most ever would, and had refused its claim on her. The body breaks first, the heart breaks last. Iron Jim's words had proven prophetic. Her body had indeed broken under the strain of her wounds, but her heart, both literally and figuratively, had refused to yield. Iron Heart. She decided she could live with that nickname. As the morphine pulled her back towards sleep, her thoughts turned to the operation plan for tomorrow. Hargrove's final reckoning, the culmination of Westbrook's 30-year mission, justice for her fallen teammates. It wasn't over yet. One final challenge remained. But Morgan Kane had never backed down from a challenge, and she wasn't about to start now. The heart keeps beating until you decide it's done. And she wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. The command center hummed with precise activity. Analysts moved between workstations with purpose. Tactical displays showed real-time satellite imagery. Communications specialists monitored encrypted channels, all focused on a single objective, the apprehension of General Malcolm Hargrove, the man known to insiders as the Director. In the center of this controlled chaos sat Major Morgan Kane, wheelchair-bound but fully alert. The doctors had reluctantly cleared her for 6 hours away from her hospital bed, provided she remained seated and under medical supervision. A compromise she'd accepted only because the alternative meant missing Hargrove's takedown completely. Her body remained broken. 4 surgeries in 3 days had repaired the worst damage to her lung and removed bone fragments that threatened her heart. But complete recovery would require months of rehabilitation. The pain remained constant despite medication, a burning presence with each breath that reminded her how close to death she'd come. Yet here she sat monitoring drone feeds and communication channels determined to see this through to the end. The wheelchair was positioned before a bank of screens displaying various angles of Hargrove's private airfield in rural Virginia. Thermal imaging showed activity inside the main hangar where the general's Gulfstream jet was being prepared for immediate departure. "Terminal is secure," came Westbrook's voice through the command center speakers. "Alpha team in position at north perimeter. Bravo team covering the access road. Charlie team on standby for breach." The colonel himself led the operation from the ground, coordinating 3 tactical teams positioned strategically around the airfield. FBI hostage rescue team operators, mixed with Westbrook's own hand-picked personnel, all focused on ensuring Hargrove couldn't escape justice again. Kane adjusted her headset, syncing to the operational frequency. Drone 1 shows 2 SUVs approaching from the south access road, matching known Hargrove security team vehicles. "Copy that," Westbrook acknowledged. "All teams maintain position. Let them reach the hangar before we move. We want Hargrove in the terminal building when we breach." The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Allow Hargrove to enter the terminal, then lock down all escape routes simultaneously. Quick, clean, minimal risk to the operators. The FBI had obtained sealed federal warrants for the general's arrest on charges of treason, conspiracy to commit murder of federal officers, arms trafficking, and a dozen other serious offenses. The evidence from the Black dossier had proven overwhelming. Financial records showing billions in illegal weapons sales. Operational plans targeting American forces to protect the conspiracy. Communications directly linking Hargrove to the ambush that had nearly killed Kane and had taken the lives of most of her team. Justice was coming for the general. 30 years of shadows about to be exposed to harsh light. Vehicle 1 approaching terminal, reported an analyst as the lead SUV pulled up to the hangar doors. Kane watched the thermal feed closely. 4 heat signatures exited the first vehicle. Security personnel judging by their positioning and movement patterns. The second SUV stopped directly behind the first, but no one immediately emerged. "Hold for primary target confirmation," Westbrook instructed. "All teams ready for execute order." Kane leaned forward, ignoring the stab of pain the movement caused. Something didn't feel right. Hargrove was too experienced, too cautious to walk into such an obvious trap. The man had evaded detection for 3 decades while building a shadow empire. Would he really make such a basic mistake now? She switched views between different drone feeds, studying the pattern of movement around the hangar. The security team had established a perimeter, but wasn't moving with the urgency one would expect for a high-priority evacuation. Their positioning seemed designed to draw attention rather than facilitate a quick departure. "Colonel," she said into her mic, "something's off. Security team movements are too deliberate, too visible. This feels staged." There was a brief pause before Westbrook's voice returned, lower now, more cautious. "Elaborate. If I were extracting a high-value target under threat of imminent arrest, I'd move faster, maintain lower profile. These guys look like they're putting on a show." Kane switched to thermal imaging of the hangar interior. And the aircraft engines aren't spooling up. No heat signature consistent with pre-flight preparations. Another pause, longer this time. When Westbrook spoke again, his tone had changed. And "Redirect Drone 3 to conduct sweep of all structures within 1-mile radius. Focus on any buildings with vehicle access or recent activity." The command center staff moved immediately to comply, redirecting the surveillance asset to expand their search area. Kane felt the familiar surge of adrenaline as operational momentum shifted. If Hargrove wasn't at the airfield terminal as expected, where was he? "Contact," called an analyst in suddenly. "Drone 3 has vehicle movement at secondary structure, half-mile east of primary target. Old maintenance shed with recent tire tracks." The display shifted to show a dilapidated building partially hidden by trees. A single black sedan was parked beside it, no visible security presence. "Thermal shows 2 heat signatures inside the structure," the analyst continued. "One stationary, one moving between rooms." Kane studied the new target. Isolated, inconspicuous. Exactly the kind of fallback position an experienced operative would establish. "That's him," she said with absolute certainty. "The airfield is a diversion. He's using the security team to draw our attention while he slips out another way." Westbrook didn't hesitate. "Delta team, redirect to secondary target immediately." Quiet approach, full tactical precautions. Primary suspect is likely present with minimal security. Copy that, came the acknowledgement from Delta team leader. Moving now. Kane watched on the drone feed as a four-man team detached from the main force and began moving through the wooded area toward the maintenance shed. Professionals moving with disciplined silence, weapons ready but controlled. Meanwhile, Westbrook maintained the illusion that the command team still focused on the airfield terminal. Alpha team, maintain position. Bravo Titan perimeter. Target vehicle still in place. A classic misdirection play. Keep the security team believing their diversion was working while redirecting the actual capture force to Hargrove's location. If the general was monitoring their communications, he would hear only references to the original plan. Delta team in position, came the quiet report 5 minutes later. Structure surrounded, 2 entry points identified. No additional security observed. Execute breach on my mark, Westbrook ordered. Remember, we need him alive to stand trial. Kane felt her heart rate accelerate despite the beta blockers the doctors had prescribed to minimize cardiac stress. This was it. The culmination of Westbrook's 30-year mission and her own personal vendetta against the man who'd ordered her team killed. 3, 2, 1, execute. The drone feed showed the Delta team breach both entrances simultaneously. Textbook dynamic entry. Quick, controlled, overwhelming force. Through her headset came the staccato reports of the team as they cleared each room. Front clear, hallway clear, office clear, bathroom clear, then silence. No suspect in custody call, no confirmation of Hargrove's presence. Delta leader report, Westbrook demanded. Structure completely clear, sir. No occupants present. Kane felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. What about the heat signatures? 2 space heaters, sir, placed in separate rooms. Deliberate thermal deception. The realization hit everyone simultaneously. They'd been played. The shed was another diversion just like the terminal. Hargrove had anticipated their surveillance capabilities and created multiple false targets to occupy their attention. All teams expand search perimeter immediately. Westbrook ordered controlled urgency in his voice. Air assets scan all access roads. He's still here somewhere. But Kane was already looking elsewhere. Something Westbrook had told her in Afghanistan kept replaying in her mind. Something about a 30-year deep cover operation. Colonel, she said quietly into her dedicated channel to Westbrook, when did you first identify Hargrove as the leader of Project Olympus? A brief hesitation. 1989, Soviet Union was collapsing. A lot of weapons suddenly unaccounted for. Hargrove was running special operations in Eastern Europe, redirecting those weapons through unofficial channels. I was assigned to investigate discrepancies in the supply chain. And you maintained deep cover for 30 years without official sanction. Had to. The network had too many connections in intelligence community. Couldn't trust regular channels. Kane studied the tactical map, a theory forming in her mind. So how did you fund your investigation for 3 decades without official support? The command channel went silent. The tablet showed billions moving through Project Olympus, Kane continued. Money that came from somewhere and went somewhere. But there was an account I couldn't access, heavily encrypted, separate from the others. Still silence from Westbrook. You weren't just investigating Olympus, Kane said, the pieces falling into place. You were running a parallel operation, siphoning funds from Hargrove's network to finance your own mission against him. When Westbrook finally responded, his voice had changed. Not the commanding presence of before, but something quieter, more resigned. We needed resources. Couldn't go through official channels. So yes, we redirected some of their money for a good cause. We or you. Does it matter? Kane Hargrove is a traitor who's killed dozens of American operators to protect his criminal enterprise, including most of your team. She switched her screen to the tactical positioning map locating Westbrook's signal. He'd separated from the main assault teams, his position indicator showing he was now moving toward a tertiary structure on the far side of the property. Where are you going, Colonel? Hargrove has another exit route, private road leading to a secondary landing strip 3 miles from here. I'm moving to intercept. Alone without backup. Sometimes the final part of a mission requires a personal touch, Kane. You understand that better than most. She did understand, all too well, the desire to confront your enemy face to face, to be the one who brings them to justice. But something still felt wrong, the isolation, the secrecy, the determination to confront Hargrove alone. Let me send Delta team to support you, she suggested. Negative. They're needed to maintain the perimeter. This requires a more subtle approach. Hargrove and I have history that goes back further than you know. Kane made a decision. She switched to a private channel with the command center director, a senior FBI official overseeing the operation. Sir, I need you to redirect Drone 4 to track Colonel Westbrook's position. Something isn't adding up. The director studied her for a moment, then nodded to a technician. The display shifted to show Westbrook moving through wooded terrain toward what appeared to be an old hunting cabin. His approach was tactical, professional weapon at the ready position. Magnify structure, Kane ordered. The image zoomed in to show a rustic cabin with a black SUV parked behind it, partially concealed by trees. Not the same vehicles from the airfield. This one had diplomatic plates. That's a Russian diplomatic vehicle, the FBI director noted with surprise. What the hell is it doing here? Kane felt her suspicions crystallizing into certainty. Colonel Westbrook may be compromised. We need to get ears on that meeting immediately. The director acted without hesitation, authorizing a directed microphone deployment from the drone. Seconds later, audio began streaming through the command center speakers as Westbrook approached the cabin door. The colonel knocked twice, paused, then 3 more times. A coded entry signal. The door opened to reveal not Hargrove, but a different man. Older, heavier, with the unmistakable bearing of military authority despite his civilian clothes. When he spoke, it was with a thick Russian accent. James, you are late. Our window is closing. Complications with the FBI operation, Westbrook replied, stepping inside. They're focused on the airfield. We have perhaps 15 minutes before they expand the search perimeter to this location. The door closed behind them, but the directional microphone maintained audio feed through the cabin's thin walls. General Petrov, the FBI director whispered, identifying the Russian. SVR Foreign Intelligence. Supposedly retired 5 years ago, but still active in their Special Operations Directorate. Inside the cabin, the conversation continued. The black dossier, Petrov demanded. You have it. Of course, Westbrook replied. 30 years of evidence, every operation, every account, every name. And Hargrove, by now in FBI custody or dead. Either way, no longer our concern. Good, the old bastard outlived his usefulness years ago. Too erratic, too visible. The network requires new management for a new era. Kane felt her world tilting sideways as the implications became clear. Westbrook hadn't spent 30 years working to bring down Project Olympus. He'd spent 30 years positioning himself to take it over. The funds have been transferred as agreed, Westbrook asked. 10 million USD to your Cayman account. Another 40 upon delivery of the complete dossier and network access codes. My principals are most eager to continue our mutual beneficial arrangement under your leadership. The FBI director was already issuing rapid orders to redirect all available teams to the cabin location. But Kane barely heard him. Her focus remained locked on the betrayal unfolding before her. Westbrook, her mentor, the man she'd trusted with her life, the man who'd taught her about duty, honor, loyalty, all lies. There's a complication, Westbrook was saying inside the cabin. One of my operators, Major Kane, she's seen parts of the dossier, knows too much. The woman from Afghanistan, I thought she was eliminated. She survived, remarkably resilient. But she's in a military hospital now, heavily guarded. I'll handle her personally once this transaction is complete. Kane felt a cold rage replace the shock and disbelief. The man who'd pinned the trident on her uniform, who'd whispered words of wisdom about heart and courage, was calmly discussing her murder with a Russian intelligence officer. FBI teams are 10 minutes out, the director reported urgently. We need to maintain surveillance until they arrive. But Kane was already moving, pushing herself up from the wheelchair despite the stabbing pain in her chest. A nearby security officer moved to stop her, but froze at the expression on her face. Major, you can't leave. Doctor's orders. Your condition. My condition is the least of our problems right now, she replied, grabbing her sidearm from the lockbox beside her station. If Westbrook realizes we're onto him, he'll be gone before the FBI arrives. You're in no condition to confront him, the director argued. Let the tactical teams handle this. Kane checked her weapon, a standard-issue Sig Sauer P-26, and secured it in her holster. With respect, sir, I'm the only one who might get close enough without raising his suspicions. He thinks I'm safely contained at Walter Reed. That gives me an advantage no one else has. And how exactly do you plan to get there? You can barely stand, let alone drive. Kane nodded toward the door where Master Chief Sullivan had appeared. His own injuries still evident in the stiff way he carried himself, but determination clear in his eyes. I've got a ride. 5 minutes later, Kane was in the passenger seat of a commandeered FBI vehicle, Sullivan behind the wheel, speeding toward the cabin location. Each bump in the road sent fresh waves of agony through her damaged body, but she channeled the pain into focus. You should have left this to the TAC teams, Sullivan said, eyes on the road as he pushed the vehicle to its limits. If Westbrook sees a tactical team approaching, he's gone, Kane replied, along with the only copy of the Black Dossier and 30 years of operational intelligence. Sullivan nodded grimly. Never thought Iron Jim would turn, not in a million years. Me neither. They drove in silence for another minute before Sullivan asked the question hanging between them. What's the plan when we get there? Kane checked her weapon again, more from habit than necessity. I approach alone. He still thinks I'm on his side. I get close enough to secure both him and the dossier before he realizes what's happening. And if he doesn't buy it, she met Sullivan's concerned gaze. Then I do whatever's necessary to stop him from leaving with that intelligence. Those files contain names of every operative in the Olympus network. In Russian hands, it would compromise dozens of ongoing operations and put hundreds of American agents at risk. Sullivan understood the implications. Westbrook wasn't just betraying his country for money. He was selling out every American intelligence asset connected to 3 decades of covert operations. Almost there, he said, slowing the vehicle as they approached the final turn. Half-mile ahead. We should proceed on foot to avoid detection. Kane nodded agreement. Sullivan parked the car in a concealed position off the access road, and they exited quietly. Moving through the woods would be challenging in her condition, but she had no choice. Too much was at stake. They advanced slowly, Sullivan taking point while Kane focused on maintaining her balance and controlling her breathing. Each step sent pain radiating through her chest, but she pushed it aside, concentrating on the mission. The cabin came into view through the trees, the black SUV still parked behind it. No sign of movement outside. According to her earpiece, the FBI tactical teams were still 7 minutes out. It would be just her and Sullivan until then. I'll circle around to the rear, Sullivan whispered. Cover the vehicle in case they make a run for it. You take the front, but wait for my signal before approaching. Kane nodded, then watched as Sullivan moved silently through the underbrush toward the back of the cabin. For a man in his 50s with recent injuries, he moved with remarkable stealth, his decades of special operations experience evident in every careful step. Once he was in position, Sullivan's voice came through her earpiece. Ready? Kane took a deep breath, wincing at the pain it caused, then stepped out of the tree line and approached the cabin directly. No stealth, no tactical movement, just a wounded officer walking up to her commanding officer's position as if everything were normal. She knocked on the door, the same pattern Westbrook had used earlier. 2 pause 3, silence from within. Then footsteps approaching. The door opened to reveal Westbrook, his expression shifting from alert wariness to shock as he recognized her. Kane, what the hell are you doing here? You're supposed to be at Walter Reed. She maintained a neutral expression, revealing nothing of what she knew. Sir, we have a situation. The FBI director sent me to brief you directly. May I come in? Westbrook hesitated, suspicion warring with the need to maintain his cover. Finally, he stepped aside. Make it quick. I'm in the middle of something. Kane entered the cabin immediately, noting General Petrov seated at a small table, a laptop open before him. The black dossier tablet connected to it via data cable. A file transfer in progress. Who is this? Petrov demanded, his hand moving toward what Kane presumed was a concealed weapon. Major Kane, Westbrook answered. One of my operators, the one we discussed. Understanding flashed across the Russian's face. The one from Afghanistan, the one who should be dead. The very same, Kane confirmed, her hand casually dropping to her side inches from her holster. Seems I'm difficult to kill. Westbrook's expression hardened as he realized the trap. How much do you know? Enough, she replied. The cabin is surrounded, Colonel. FBI tactical teams are minutes out. It's over. A tense silence filled the small space as both men calculated their options. Kane kept her focus on Westbrook, the greater threat given his training and experience. Petrov might be SVR, but he was older, slower, and from his physique more accustomed to desk work than field operations in recent years. 20 million, Westbrook said finally. Each. Walk away from this now. New identities, new lives, more money than you could earn in 50 years of service. Not interested, Kane replied coldly. Westbrook sighed, a sound of genuine regret. I taught you better than this, Kane. Taught you to see the bigger picture. The world isn't black and white. Sometimes the only way to serve your country is from outside the system. Spare me the rationalization. You're selling out American agents to the Russians. There's no patriotic spin to put on that. You think too small. Always have. This isn't about Russia. It's about control, information, Power. Project Olympus was never just an arms-dealing network. It was an intelligence operation spanning 3 decades. We know more about global conflicts and power structures than any official agency. We've shaped outcomes no one even knows were manipulated. As he spoke, Westbrook shifted positions slightly, moving toward the table where his sidearm rested. Kane tracked the movement without appearing to notice. And now you're selling that intelligence to the highest bidder, she countered, keeping him talking while assessing options. 3 minutes until FBI arrival, according to her earpiece's countdown. Too long. Not selling it, Westbrook corrected. Leveraging it, creating new alliances. The Cold War is over, Kane. The new battleground is information, and I control the most valuable information network ever created. Enough talk, Petrov interrupted, his patience clearly exhausted. We must leave now. Kill her and be done with it. Westbrook's hand moved toward his weapon with the speed that had made him legendary among special operators. But Kane had anticipated the move, had been ready for it from the moment she entered. Her own weapon cleared its holster as she dropped to one knee, ignoring the tearing pain in her chest. 2 shots, center mass, training taking over, muscle memory executing perfect form despite her injuries. Westbrook staggered backwards, surprise, replacing calculation in his eyes. His own weapon discharged into the ceiling as he fell, a reflexive pull of the trigger rather than aimed fire. Petrov reacted immediately, reaching inside his jacket, but never completed the motion. The cabin's rear window shattered as Sullivan's shot struck the Russian in the shoulder, spinning him away from the table. Kane maintained her firing position, weapon trained on Westbrook as he lay on the cabin floor, blood spreading across his chest. Not so different from her own wound in Afghanistan. The symmetry wasn't lost on her. Why, she asked, the single word containing all her betrayal, all her disillusionment. Westbrook coughed, blood staining his lips. 30 years, Kane, watching the system fail, watching politicians and bureaucrats undermine everything we fought for. I decided to take control, build something that couldn't be corrupted by election cycles and political appointees, and became exactly what you claimed to be fighting. A ghost of a smile crossed his lips. Perhaps, or perhaps I simply saw more clearly than most. His breathing grew labored. The dossier contains everything, every operation, every agent. In Russian hands, it would compromise our entire intelligence apparatus for the next decade. I know, that's why I'm here. Then finish it, he whispered. The body breaks first, the heart breaks last. Kane stared at her former mentor, the man who had shaped her into the operator she'd become. The man who had saved her life in Afghanistan, only to betray everything she believed in. The man who now lay dying by her hand. She lowered her weapon. No, you'll face justice. Answer for what you've done. But Westbrook shook his head slightly. Too late for that. His hand moved suddenly, not toward a weapon, but to his chest, pressing against a specific point near his heart. Kane recognized the gesture too late. Dead man's switch. A final failsafe implanted near the heart, triggered manually in case of capture. Old-school Cold War technology, the kind of extreme measure only the most dedicated operatives would consider. Asset denial protocol, Westbrook gasped. 60 seconds, get the dossier and go, run. Sullivan was already moving, securing the wounded Petrov with flex cuffs before grabbing the tablet and laptop from the table. We need to move now. Kane holstered her weapon and knelt beside Westbrook. You didn't have to end it this way. The old colonel's eyes were growing distant. Some missions can only end one way. His breathing became more labored. The dossier, protect it, in the wrong hands. I understand, Kane assured him, knowing that whatever poison the dead man's switch had released was already shutting down his system. A final act of operational security from a man who had lived his entire life in shadows. Kane, Sullivan called urgently from the doorway. We have less than 30 seconds. She nodded, then looked one last time at the man who had been her mentor, her commander, and ultimately her enemy. Goodbye, Iron Jim, she said quietly, then turned and followed Sullivan from the cabin. They were barely 50 meters away when the structure erupted in flames. Not a conventional explosion, but an intense, controlled inferno designed to destroy evidence and eliminate all traces of the occupants. The SVR vehicle was caught in the blaze, ensuring no evidence would remain of the Russian connection. Kane and Sullivan took cover behind a fallen tree as debris rained down around them. Through her earpiece, she could hear the FBI tactical teams reporting the explosion and redirecting to their position. Within minutes, the area would be swarming with federal agents. Did you get everything? She asked Sullivan, nodding toward the tablet and laptop he carried from the cabin. He nodded grimly. Complete download was at 87% when we interrupted. Most of the Black dossier is intact, enough to identify every member of the Olympus network. Kane felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. 3 decades of covert operations, hundreds of names, billions in illegal funds, and the complete anatomy of a shadow intelligence organization that had operated beyond any oversight or accountability. What happens now? Sullivan asked. Before she could answer, the first FBI vehicles arrived, agents deploying in tactical formation, despite the obvious fact that the primary threat had been eliminated in the explosion. The FBI director himself approached their position, eyeing the burning cabin with a mixture of frustration and relief. Major Kane, Master Chief Sullivan. He nodded to each of them. I see you handled the situation before we could arrive. Kane gestured to the tablet Sullivan held. The intelligence is secure. Most of the Black dossier was downloaded before we interrupted the transfer. The director's expression grew somber. That information is now classified at the highest level. No one outside this operation is to know what happened here today. Not Hargrove's involvement, not Westbrook's betrayal, not the Russian connection, none of it. With respect, sir, Kane replied, keeping this secret only allows the corruption to continue. The public deserves to know how deep this conspiracy went, how many deaths it caused. And they will, eventually, after we've had time to roll up the entire network, after we've secured every compromised asset. The director's tone softened slightly. I understand your desire for immediate justice, Major, but exposing everything now would only cause more American deaths. Westbrook and Hargrove are gone. The immediate threat is neutralized. Now we need to work methodically to dismantle what they built. Kane understood the logic even if she didn't like it. Operational security sometimes required uncomfortable compromises. Another lesson from Iron Jim, though, the irony of applying it now wasn't lost on her. What about our team? Sullivan asked. The men we lost in Afghanistan deserve recognition. Their families deserve the truth. The director nodded. They'll get it. Official story will cite a classified operation against high-value targets. Medals will be awarded. Families will receive full benefits and recognition. But the specific details of Project Olympus remain classified. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was something. A recognition of sacrifice that the fallen deserved. And General Hargrove, Kane asked, took his own life when FBI agents approached him at the airfield terminal, the director confirmed. Cyanide capsule, old school, just like Westbrook's implanted device. These Cold War dinosaurs and their dramatic exits. 3 medical technicians approached one pushing a wheelchair that Kane eyed with reluctance. Major, you need to return to the hospital immediately, the director insisted. The doctors were explicit about your condition. 6 hours maximum away from medical supervision, and you've nearly exceeded that. Kane wanted to argue, but knew he was right. The adrenaline that had carried her through the confrontation was fading, and the pain in her chest had intensified to nearly unbearable levels. Her body had reached its limits. The tablet stays with me, she stated firmly as she allowed the medics to help her into the wheelchair, until we reach secure facilities at Langley. The director nodded agreement. Of course. You and Master Chief Sullivan will be debriefed there once you're medically stable. After that, well, your future assignments will depend somewhat on your recovery. Future assignments, the word struck Kane as almost absurd given everything that had happened. 2 weeks ago, she'd been leading a routine patrol in Afghanistan. Now she'd survived multiple attempts on her life, uncovered a decades-long conspiracy, and killed her own mentor. What kind of future remained after that? As if reading her thoughts, Sullivan rested a hand briefly on her shoulder. One day at a time, Major. First we heal, then we honor our fallen, then we continue the mission. The mission. Always the mission. It was what drove operators like them forward, what gave purpose to the pain and sacrifice. Even when the mission changed, even when those you trusted betrayed you, the core commitment remained. Kane nodded silently as the medics wheeled her toward the waiting ambulance. Her gaze drifted once more to the burning cabin where Iron Jim Westbrook had ended his 30-year operation. The man had been a traitor in the end, but he'd also been right about one thing. The body breaks first, the heart breaks last. Her body had indeed broken under the strain of combat and injury, multiple surgeries, shattered ribs, punctured lung, wounds that would require months to heal properly if they ever healed completely. But her heart, both literally and metaphorically, had refused to yield, had continued beating despite everything thrown against it, had maintained its essential rhythm even when a bullet threatened to stop it forever. Ironheart. The nickname no longer seemed like hyperbole. 3 months later, Kane stood at attention in the Pentagon's Hall of Heroes as the Secretary of Defense presented her with the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. The official citation referenced only actions against enemy forces in Afghanistan and exceptional courage under fire, carefully omitting any mention of Project Olympus, Westbrook's betrayal, or the subsequent events in Virginia. Sullivan received the Silver Star, along with the 2 other survivors from their original team. Posthumous awards were presented to the families of those who hadn't returned, with Kane personally speaking to each family afterward, sharing what details she could while honoring operational security restrictions. It wasn't perfect closure, but it was something: recognition of sacrifice, acknowledgement of valor, the foundations upon which their service was built. After the ceremony, Kane found herself alone in the memorial garden outside the Pentagon. Her physical recovery had progressed faster than the doctors anticipated, though she still carried the scars, both visible and invisible. The pain in her chest had diminished to a dull ache that flared only during strenuous activity. The nightmares came less frequently now. Major Kane. She turned to find the FBI director approaching, now dressed in the uniform of his actual agency, the CIA. Another layer of the operation she hadn't been privy to initially. Director, congratulations on your new position. The man had recently been named Deputy Director for Operations, one of the most powerful intelligence posts in the country. A necessary step, he replied. Someone needs to oversee the dismantling of the Olympus network. Someone who knows the full scope of what we're dealing with. Kane nodded, understanding. How is that progressing? 17 senior officials arrested quietly over the past 3 months. Billions in illegal funds seized. Arms pipelines shut down across 3 continents. He allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. Your mentor built something remarkably comprehensive. I'll give him that. He wasn't my mentor, not in the end. The director studied her for a moment. We all have our breaking points, Kane. 3 decades of operating in shadows changes a man, corrupts his perspective. Westbrook started with the best intentions, I believe. Somewhere along the way, he convinced himself that the ends justified any means. A convenient rationalization, but a dangerous one, and a warning for all of us who operate on the edges of conventional authority. He reached into his jacket and removed a sealed envelope. Which brings me to the purpose of my visit. Your next assignment, should you choose to accept it. Kane took the envelope but didn't immediately open it. I haven't been medically cleared for field operations. This isn't a field operation, not exactly. The director gestured to the envelope. Read it, consider it, then call me. After he departed, Kane opened the envelope and scanned the contents quickly. A new position, a new team. Operation Iron Sentinel, tasked with monitoring for signs of corruption within the intelligence community itself. An internal watchdog group with extraordinary authority and minimal oversight, reporting directly to the CIA director and a select congressional committee. The kind of position that would once have gone to someone like Westbrook. The kind of responsibility that could either prevent another Project Olympus or potentially create one. Kane refolded the document and returned it to the envelope. She would need time to consider, time to determine if she was the right person for such a mission. Time to ensure that her own moral compass remained properly calibrated after everything she'd experienced. As she walked back toward the Pentagon, her hand unconsciously rose to her chest, fingers tracing the scar tissue beneath her uniform where a bullet had nearly taken her life. The physical reminder of how close she'd come to death. The permanent mark of her rebirth as something stronger. Ironheart. Perhaps it wasn't just a nickname after all. Perhaps it was a responsibility, a standard to uphold, a mission in itself. The body breaks first, the heart breaks last. Or in her case, the heart doesn't break at all. It simply transforms, becoming something stronger, more resilient, something capable of withstanding whatever challenges lie ahead. Whatever she decided about the new assignment, whatever path her career took from this point forward, one thing remained certain. Morgan Kane had faced death and emerged victorious, had confronted betrayal and maintained her integrity, had experienced the worst humanity could offer and still found the strength to continue serving. That was the true legacy of the Iron Heart. Not just survival, but purpose. Not just resilience, but renewal. And as the Pentagon rose before her, its massive structure, a testament to both the power and responsibility of American military, Mike Kane made a silent promise to herself and to the teammates who hadn't returned from Afghanistan. The mission continues. The heart keeps beating. The fight goes on. Always forward, never quit. Iron Heart.